Good afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome you to this panel on ancient Egypt and Persia. Following the model of our two panel chairs from this morning, I'll keep my introductions very brief, and please hold your questions until after the first two papers. We'll have a brief Q&A session before the break. Our first speaker is Kathleen or Kara Cooney, who is a professor of Egyptian art and architecture and chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures here at UCLA. Today, she will be talking about the invention of monotheism in ancient Egypt.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Rahim. Thank you, organizers. So as I go through this and speak until about 3, she said confidently, I hope to be of service to my colleagues of ancient Iran. This is not my area of expertise. I don't specialize in Amarna studies or Akhenaten, but you wouldn't be an Egyptologist if this wasn't of interest to you. So Akhenaten is a strange and bizarre figure that pulls the mind towards him. And so let's do a bit of a discussion about whether this is a sly title, yes? Whether there is monotheism involved. If you want to get all axial on it, we can throw out words like henotheism. Polytheism is, of course, a given. So let's discuss how far this extended, and then I leave it to you to determine if there were any direct, through orality or the written word, connections to other parts of the world. So the topic of Akhenaten's religion and all of his innovations being monotheistic is an old one, and you can go all the way back to Breasted and Petrie to find discussions that, uncritical conclusions that this was a monotheistic invention, that Egypt did this, that Akhenaten did this, that the invention of one god is to be laid at Egypt's feet. And recently we have a lot more critical discussions of this. Having grown up Roman Catholic, the idea of monotheism in practice is much more complicated, I think all of you know, than we might like it to be as we discuss it here in this room. I'll give you the evidence as I can in 20 minutes, but please know the amount of ink spilled on this subject is great, and you can go down a rabbit hole of extraordinary length, and you will not find the end of this topic. But the Donald Redford quote, I think, is quite useful. A criticism of the uncritical conclusion that we have monotheism at work. Also a criticism of the ends and means of it. And these two things, I think, have been conflated. The more that we realize that Akhenaten's regime had a very dark underbelly to it, the more we question whether or not it was monotheism. And I would like to separate those two things. The more we find out that Akhenaten's regime was not full of puppies and rainbows and love and happiness, you'll see images of it, but was full of work camp-like conditions, gulag-type conditions to build a city in under 10 years, the less we think it's monotheistic. And that has to do with our assumptions of what monotheism is rather than not. So those two things must be separated. But the Donald Redford quote really puts, I think it's a quick understanding of where Egyptology is. The conflation of the morality with monotheism and but we're not sure it's even that, and there's no direct connection anyway, and so we move on. So the time period that we're talking about, for those of you that are not Egyptologists and have no idea who Akhenaten is, we're talking about the 18th dynasty, and we're talking about the 14th century BCE, and we're talking about Northeast Africa, of course. And Akhenaten, as king of Egypt, would have found many capitals. He would have dwelled in Heliopolis, the city of the sun, to the north when he became king, Memphis, that very first of Egyptian cities, and also Thebes, the city of Amun-Re, down to the south. He would eschew all of these cities by the end, and he would found a new capital city there in the middle to the north, or you see it, Amarna, right there. I have no pointer, sorry, where it says Western Desert, and then head over to the right. Do I have a pointer? Maybe I do. No, it would be too easy. Okay, I give up. Oh, Marissa, you're always my savior. There. Oh, look at that. The red button. Duh. Okay. So here we are, Amarna, and that is where he ends up in the end, and we will see. Things started out rather normal enough. Amenhotep III, his father, was is a very well-known polytheistic king, depicts everything in the traditional ways, extraordinary prolific builder of the highest quality monuments that can be imagined. I think this is in many ways the apex of Egyptian cultural production. And his son, Amenhotep IV, as Egyptologists call him, the next Amenhotep in line, follows those traditions. And you can see his face over there to the right, Reharachti here to the left. His image looks very much like his father's, and there's nothing strange or untoward in this image. And then we start to see something suddenly very, very different. This man decided to depict himself in a very unusual way, unprecedented way, unique. This has not been repeated, and it was not seen before. You see an image of a man that is also part woman, many Egyptologists have argued, with those full hips and thighs and that narrow waist. Very narrow, spindly ankles and wrists as well. You see a pulled down visage, and if you look at it from the side, a prognathic visage that Egyptologists like Dorothea Arnold have argued is part animal and part human. So we're part male, part female, part animal, part human. And then I would take this one step forward, and when you're really looking at these images in the light of day, which is how they were meant to be displayed, this is a king of the sun in the sky, right? You see those cheekbones carved, the way the eyes are depicted. I think he is trying to depict himself as a being of light. And anybody here see Close Encounters of the Third Kind? A little movie reference, when the aliens come out and the light's behind them and they look all weird and misshapen and bizarre. I actually think that's what Akhenaten is trying to do. He's showing himself at his window of appearances, a place that he favors, and I think he is choosing the right time of day for the sun to be coming behind him, very strong, in the eyes of the audience, so they can barely see what's going on, and then he's revealing himself. And of course, the wrists and the ankles are spindly and narrow, and his whole body is misshapen. He is animal, he is human, he is male, he is female, he is light, he is flesh. He is all of these things simultaneously. This is what Egyptologists generally focus on, and the amount of ink that has been spilled on the strange diseases this king supposedly had, from being a hermaphrodite to Furlick syndrome to Marfan syndrome, or many, and I buy into none of them. We can talk about that later if you like. This king, Amenhotep IV, decides to change his name. We'll get to that. But he then decides, with this image change, to start new rituals or putting a different divinity on top of very old rituals, because you see here we have a Sed festival procession, which is one of the oldest kingly celebrations and reinvigorations of the kingship, going all the way back to Dynasty I, potentially, and perhaps even before that. And you see the king depicted here in his Sed festival garment, and there are the rays of this Aten sun disk, not a new god. The Aten had existed previous to this, but a god that is being elevated to a height not seen before. Akhenaten is his new name, this king. He leaves Amenhotep, Amen is at peace, behind, and he moves to this new name, the one who is beneficial for the Aten, so we think. So there's the Amenhotep, and he leaves this behind. He is now the one who is beneficial for this new Aten. And the Aten, its determinative is the sun. And there is even discussion within Egyptology, is this the sun disk or is it the sun globe? What did the Egyptians know about this thing in the sky? Did they understand it as being round or flat or what? That's another discussion as well. This is an interesting point as we talk about henotheism, monotheism, what is the nature of this divinity, which is the point of this talk. Here he calls himself Wa and Re, the one of Re, the only one of Re, the only one that can connect with Re. He does not drop that from his name. That is given to him as his throne name, and he maintains it. So even when he changes the nomen from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, that Wa and Re, the one of Re, is maintained. Now, things start to get very interesting because he then gives this divinity, the Aten, its own cartouches. His or her own cartouches. It's depicted as, it's called a he and a him in the text, but there are parts of the text that talk about it as if it has a feminine nature, this divinity. And here we see, first, the idea of giving a god a cartouche is, according to Donald Redford in particular, a way of lowering the level of divinity and raising the level of kingship. So this has hegemony and power grabs all over it, right? This is all about the optics of what kingship is and using this new development of divinity to bolster him and his power in some way. But the names are very instructive for the purposes at hand. So there are two of them. He starts with this. You can see throughout Akhenaten's reign as he's developing and thinking, he keeps changing stuff. There's always another emendation. There's always another little tweak. There's always another little thing that he's got to add, a name he's got to take out, some name he's got to put in. You can imagine this guy going into his temple spaces and closing his eyes and just, I don't know, connecting with the divinity, which is what he tells us he does. And then when he closets himself with this divinity, he comes out and he's like, oh, we have to do it this way or we have to do it that way. One can imagine quite a bit how these things happened. We don't really know. But the first names of this god are the Horus of the two horizons, Re Herakti, if you like, who is rejoicing in the horizon. And then this second one is, it's a continuation, which is very interesting. In his name of Shu, or in his name as Shu, who is as the Aten. And here we have some things you're like, well, it can't be monotheism, it has to be henotheism, or if you're using that axial modality, you might be thinking. Because here we have a divinity, Re Herakti, yeah? There are temples built to Re Herakti. This is somebody who is considered a divinity. And here we have the divinity Shu. Now, these two things seem to have been problematic for Akhenaten as he's developing this new divinity and aggrandizing it and understanding how to name him and discuss him. Because in the next iteration of these cartouches, these are gone. No more Re Herakti, no more Shu. He changes it so that we now have the living sun, the ruler of the two horizons, who rejoices in the Aten. See the difference? The god is gone. And then we have in his name of, no more Shu. Shu can also mean light. Can mean the god Shu, but Shu can mean light. But we have in his name of the one who comes in or as the Aten. So those things needed to be removed. And if you're looking at this as a circumstantial argument to say that having the names of other divinities in the presence of the Aten was problematic for Akhenaten, this would fit into that. So now he's establishing this capital city, this new place. He calls it Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten. If you're confused, you're like, well, wait, I thought his name was Akhenaten. No, his name is Akhenaten. The city's Akhenaten. If you think that he's trying to make the two conflated, you would be right. He is the place, and the place is him, in a sense. And there are a number of ways that he goes about delimiting this city. He builds a series of boundary stela, very important structures for Egyptology to try to understand what this divinity is all about. And obviously, I can't go through all of this text, and I hope you can see what I've highlighted here. Just some little things that I want to point out as we discuss what the nature of this divinity is. He tells us that the Aten spoke to him, desired that he build this capital city with his everlasting name. So we can assume that the god is also telling him what his name should be. And he says, now it is the Aten, my father, masculine, right, who advised me concerning it, namely Akhenaten. No officials ever advised me concerning it. Not any of my people who are in the entire land had ever advised me concerning it. He goes on to say, it's my idea. No one else told me to do it. It's all mine. And then skip down to the bottom there. And he says, and I don't like the word pharaoh, but I pulled this from a different translation. I like the word king. I don't like to assign a biblical name to these discussions. But it is the king who has discovered it, not being the property of a god, not being the property of a goddess, not being the property of a ruler. So now we're complicating things a little bit. Akhenaten is specifically telling us that he chose this site out in the middle of Middle Egypt, really the middle of nowhere, and that it was not claimed previously by any god, by any goddess. There was no temple there previous. It was a virgin site. No one had claimed it. So one might look at this and say, oh, he is admitting the existence of other divinities. Those divinities are there. And yet you could make the circumstantial argument in the other direction too, couldn't you? By saying that he needed for this new religious experiment, this new place to be so sacred to the god Aten, to be unsullied by any other, even imaginings of other divinities. So they must be removed. And this doesn't really help us as much as we would like. Certainly doesn't help me. and the ink continues to be spilled. The temples are not very helpful on this discussion of monotheism or henotheism either, but they do provide more circumstantial evidence. You have a simplified structure, a stripped down structure. The roof is gone. You're moving in one direction on an east-west axis, and you're moving towards the back of this structure to a room that is still open to the light, to the sun. That is your idol. That is your cult divinity now. There are no more statues. And it has a single pointed focus that you don't see in other Egyptian temples. If you went down to Thebes, you would see a tripartite shrine at the back. You would have Amun-Re, you would have Mut, you would have Khonsu, you would have that divine family. Here we go to a single point, and this is different. Other temples, if you went to Memphis, if you went to Heliopolis, you would see a family of divinities, a male, a female, and a child, generally. Here we have that single point. He is everything, this divinity. He is all, he is nothing, and he is open to the sky. The depictions of the temples, as Akhenaten is showing them, they don't show any images of the divinity. He shows only images of himself, stela, other things, the offering tables heaped with all of these offerings. So this isn't going to help us either. It's in the altars that the Egyptians were building that the Egyptian people, it seems, needed to put into their homes. And by Egyptian people, I mean the elites of Akhenaten. In their homes, there were all of these different altars that show the king and his chief queen Nefertiti, their children, and the Aten disk between them. The Aten disk is given a uraeus, as a king would be. Again, like Redford says, lowering the level of divinity, raising the level of kingship. Yes, the god is higher than Akhenaten, but Akhenaten is larger, and you can discuss all of that in your mind. But the idea of the life-giving rays of the sun, with the Ankh, the symbol of life at the end, touching the nose. This is a key feature of this divinity. Okay, now I have like 5 minutes left, and just briefly, I have the entire hymn to the Aten here, which we will not read in its entirety, but I have sections highlighted that I want to focus on. We can read this whole first page, though. The only full attestation of the hymn to the Aten, if I'm not mistaken, is in the tomb of Ai at Tel el Amarna, the ancient Akhenaten. There are other smaller hymns to the Aten, but it's interesting, this is not preserved in a temple space, only in the elite temples, the elite tombs at this funerary necropoli of the city. So here. You rise beautiful from the horizon on heaven, living disk. Again, that could be globe. It's just the Aten. Origin of life. You are risen from the horizon. You have filled every land with your beauty. You are fine, great, radiant, lofty, over and above every land. Your rays bind the lands, the limit of all you have made. You are the sun. You have reached their limits. You bind them for your beloved son. You are distant, but your rays are on earth. So he is far away, but he is right here. And those of you that walked up the stairs, you know what I'm talking about. As I saw you come in, because that's the Aten, and he's making you sweat. So you are in their sight, but your movements are hidden. So we cannot see him going through the sky, but he can see everything. So we have omnipotence, we have omniscience, we have all of these things that we would associate with that single divinity. You rest in the western horizon, and the land is in darkness in the manner of death. This section here is a part that Egyptologists focus on to try to claim that monotheism did not exist, that when this god is gone, is not in the heavenly skies, that there is no divinity. The divinity is gone. So this can't be monotheism. It's an absence of divinity. And it's quite scary, this section of the text. And so people are saying, no, it's not monotheism. Again, I would say that's our perception of what we think monotheism should be. This section here, I won't read it, but it's about all of the things that the sun god, the Aten, can do, all of the tasks, the trees, the plants, the birds. This has, in some ways, almost a direct connection, not line by line, but certainly idea by idea, the mention of the great green of the Mediterranean Sea at the bottom, to Psalm 104, for those of you that would like to check that out. I do think there are connections going on here through orality, if not the written word. What the mechanism of that is over 600-700 years of time, I don't know. Here's a section where you can see this Aten as feminine as well as masculine. No, the Aten is not called a she, but the Aten is called a nurse, someone who is succoring with the breast. So you have the seed, the masculine element at the beginning, right? The semen, and the hieroglyphs are very clear. You'll see a phallus, you'll see all of the things that show you it's a masculine element. And then the nurse and the womb, all of those determinatives associated with the feminine body are there in description of this divinity. So those two things are put together, male and female. And I would alert you to look at, again, having grown up Roman Catholic, if you look at some Gnostic texts of early Christianity, there are some wonderful hymns to divinity that make divinity like a nursemaid, somebody that is giving breast milk to people as well as a heavenly father. So there is an interesting gender ambiguity about this divinity, or demand. If you're going to have one God, you better have male and female simultaneously. Here we have, how numerous are your works, though hidden from sight. And here's where we get to the crux of it and what the Egyptologists really hold on to claim that this is a single divinity, the invention of monotheism, if you like. Unique God, there is none beside him. You mold the earth to your wish, you and you alone. Now again, is this claiming a hegemony of this divinity over other divinities? Or is this an overt claim that only this divinity exists and no other? I would lead your mind back to those cartouches and the development of Akhenaten's own mind, because this is a top-down, not a bottom-up religious experimentation, that within Akhenaten's own mind, this was not completely clarified, that he started out with a sun divinity that could include Re Harakti and Shu, and then those things had to go, that he becomes more exclusionary, more iconoclastic even, as time goes on. Oh, we will skip. This is actually a very difficult section. Bloop. And then just this last slide. You have, I think so, right? No, oh dear. Rising, shining, distant, near, you make millions of forms from yourself, lone one, only one. And the word wa is used here. You create alone what you have made. This is something that the point is being emphasized here. And then I think finally, yes. I'll start at the line above. Motion is in every leg since you founded the earth. You raise them for your son, that's Akhenaten, who came from your body, the king who lives on right. That's the word ma'at, truth, justice, right? Lord of the two lands, Nefer Hepru Re, Wa'en Re, soul one of Re, son of Re who lives on right, Lord of risings, Lord of all of the movements of the sun, the two Achet, the two horizons. Akhenaten, great in his lifespan, and the great king's wife, whom he loves, lady of the two lands, Nefer Neferuaten, Nefertiti, eternally alive. My 20 minutes are over, but I would like to leave you with the idea that this development of, or this experimentation with divinity, if it is monotheism or not, in a way is immaterial. Those are our definitions. But something is going on here, and I would take that something, this experimentation, and assign it directly to what it is, which is a top-down political hegemonic affair, rather than any sort of grassroots understanding of philosophical notions of what is divinity and trying to figure it all out. This is one man imposing things on people below him. How that transferred, I do not know. Thank you.